big boat. The Titanic was a lot bigger than most people think. It was more than twice the size of a football field at 882.5 feet long, 92.5 feet wide, and 175 feet high. Holding up to 2,200 people, it was considered the largest ship ever built at the time it first set sail. Compared to cruise ships nowadays, though, the Titanic is surprisingly small based on the size of current vessels. The Royal Caribbean's Oasis of the Seas, for example, is a member of the world's largest class of ships, which is almost 5 times bigger than the Titanic and holds almost 4 times more passengers than the Titanic did. It is also an extra 300 feet longer, coming to an astounding length of almost 1,200 feet. Another difference between modern-day cruise ships and the Titanic is that most cruises these days don't venture through icebergs. They are generally more inclined to go to tropical destinations. Number 9. Hygiene. The designers of the Titanic didn't necessarily take hygiene into consideration when it was being built. It definitely had bathtubs, sinks, and toilets, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't a shortage of them. For first-class suites on the Titanic, each room had its own private bathroom, which is what is considered normal in the modern age. For all those second and third-class passengers, however, those passengers were forced to share communal bathrooms. But of all 3 types of classes of passengers, the third class especially suffered the worst, with only 2 bathtubs available for over 700 passengers. I guess Leonardo DiCaprio wasn't as we may have hoped. With those types of accommodations, though, we can imagine that the lines for bathrooms would have been insane for that many passengers. Number 8. Environmentally unfriendly. The Titanic wasn't exactly the most environmentally friendly ship that could have been built. In fact, it ejected over 100 tons of ash into the sea every 24 hours and burned approximately 650 tons of coal, which was hand-shoveled by a team of 176 men into the furnace. Cruise ships nowadays use a somewhat cleaner alternative for fuel, which is more beneficial for the environment. This type of fuel, known as marine gas oil, or MGO, is used by gas turbine engines in modern-day cruise ships. Nowadays, a ship like the Titanic would not pass the environmental measures to even be allowed to set sail in the excessive amount of pollution and waste that is sent into the ocean and air. Number 7. Memorial Cruise. If watching films, reading books, and articles on the Titanic isn't a dramatic enough experience for you, there is a real-life cruise ship which can take you right to the destination where the Titanic sank. The cruise ship of this voyage is called the Titanic Memorial Cruise, and it's an experience to commemorate all souls laid to rest in the unfortunate events of the wreckage. The Memorial Cruise is a 12-night voyage that carries the same amount of passengers as the original and casts off from Southampton. The entire trip is theme-based in the period of 1912, as both crew members and passengers dress the part in an effort to recreate the experience of the Titanic. Minus the disaster, of course. Its maiden voyage was to kickstart its expedition exactly 100 years after the unfortunate events of the Titanic's voyage. Number 6. Missing wreckage. Despite everyone knowing the famous tales of the Titanic, surveyors weren't able to pinpoint the exact location of the wreckage for many years. In spite of all the explorations trying to locate the Titanic's final resting place, it actually took 73 to find the remains of the sunken ship. Scientists and explorers had started searching for the lost vessel immediately after it sank in 1912, although it wasn't discovered until September 1, 1985, by the American oceanographer Dr. Robert Ballard. In Ballard's novel, Finding the Titanic, he described it as, imagine looking for something tiny, like an earring, on a football field in darkness. That's a bit like looking for the wreck of the Titanic in the middle of the huge Atlantic Ocean. Have you seen any footage of the Titanic? Tell us about it in the comments below. While you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Number 5. Poor weather. Tragically for the passengers of the Titanic, the weather played an unfortunate role in 1912. Scientists feel that if the weather conditions were different, the Titanic would not have endured its tragic fate. According to a British historian, Tim Malton, it is believed that the atmosphere on the night that the ship sank made it difficult for the human eye to see the hazard, as the conditions did not allow the crew to identify icebergs. Malton had discovered that atmospheric conditions in the area that night were a state known as superrefraction. This superrefraction caused mirages to appear, also known as the bending of light, which made the iceberg, in a sense, invisible. If it weren't for these rare but natural atmospheric conditions, the Titanic may have survived the ice fields. But in the unfortunate events that took place, there was simply no way to avoid the trajectory into the iceberg. By the time the optical illusion ended and the captain's vision was no longer shrouded, it was too late and the Titanic was too large to re-navigate in time. Number 4. The unsinkable ship. One big issue with the Titanic was, of course, its claims as an unsinkable ship by the designer, Thomas Andrews. Whether it was Andrews' scheme to other passenger liners at the time or to impress the media, it brought a lot of attention to the vessel and a name to live up to. But it was never truly believed by Andrews that the ship was actually unsinkable, for all he did was design it. Even Harland and Wolff, who were the shipbuilders, stated that the Titanic was never advertised as unsinkable. The myth was originally conjured up by the peoples in terms of the articles that were published in the Irish News and Shipbuilder magazine at the time. Although evidence shows that Andrews may have truly believed on some subconscious level that the ship really was unsinkable, due to the amount of lifeboats he placed on the ship. There was a lack of lifeboats for all the 2,200 people on board, which was considered a major design flaw. But I guess why would that matter if the ship was truly unsinkable? Would it then need no lifeboats at all? Not only was there a lack of lifeboats to save all of the passengers, but in a severe lack of judgment, none of them were filled to their full capacity in the evacuation process. This was thought to be due to the panic on board by crew members and passengers, which resulted in only saving 705 people's lives rather than the full 2,200 on board. This was not apparent at the time on deck, as the first lifeboat to launch only carried 24 people when its max capacity was actually 65. Number 3. Lifeboat training. There was one regrettable decision on April 15th of 1912, the day that the Titanic had sunk, which could have essentially changed history. The commander of the Titanic, Captain Smith, had originally arranged a lifeboat drill in the morning to show the passengers what to do in any emergency if the vessel was to capsize. Unfortunately, for some unknown reason, Captain Smith canceled the drill, which potentially resulted in many unnecessary deaths at the time the iceberg made impact. Many people believe that if it wasn't for Captain's mission, the lifeboat drill could have saved many people's lives and would have also abolished the panic on deck. Number 2. Stoic passengers. Quite a few victims unfortunately passed away on board the ship without evacuating, stuck in between the confines of the Titanic, a horrible death. But not only average Joes went down with the vessel, some extremely wealthy individuals also passed in the wreckage of the ship. Many of the victims of this tragedy are long forgotten, but one who stands out in particular was John Jacob Astor IV, who was last seen carrying his wife to a lifeboat. Some of his last words to the passengers on the boat were, "The ladies have to go first," followed by his final words to his newly wedded wife, which were, "I'll see you later," as the lifeboat left the sinking vessel. John Jacob Astor IV was the wealthiest man on the Titanic, but still valued the lives of others before his own. His body was recovered eventually with $2,440 cash on him, which is the equivalent of $60,000 in today's currency. Another wealthy businessman, known as Bentheim, was a notable victim. He had noticed the ship was going down, but rather than panicking, he and his valet, Victor Giglio, decided to change into their best clothes, stating that, "We've dressed up in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." This wasn't the last that was ever seen of them, though, as they were spotted on deck in their final hours, smoking and drinking brandy as the ship went down into the depths of the ocean. Number 1. Uncanny prediction. Many people believe that a novella, which was published in 1898, a full 14 years before the wreckage of the Titanic, had predicted the future of the ship. Morgan Robertson's book, Futility, has a similar resemblance surrounding the story of the Titanic. The book tells a story about the largest ship ever built, which was claimed unsinkable by its British creators. Not only do the claims of the Titanic remain the same as the novel, but also the book had a similar name for the ship called the Titan, only 2 letters off from the actual name of the ship. The book also predicted other events similar to that of the Titanic, such as the boat would make contact with an iceberg and sink. And due to lack of lifeboats, more than half of the passengers would perish in the northern Atlantic.